Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is the time and place for the Game Control Board to have a discussion regarding Nevada Game Control Board investigation standards and processes. I believe this workshop has been properly noticed in accordance with Nevada's open meeting law. So therefore, we will move into our first segment, which, if you would, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. That brings us to our public comment section. Madam Secretary, are you on the line? I don't believe she is. I'll go ahead and handle this then. This item is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters. Anyone wishing to address the board may do so at this time. Comments by each person are limited to 3 minutes as a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. If board members are asking questions of a speaker, that will not be deducted from a speaker's time. If speakers have any handouts or written materials that they'd like included as part of the record, please provide them to the enforcement agent seated to your left in Las Vegas or seated behind you in Carson City. Pursuant to state open meeting law, matters brought to the attention of the board during public comment cannot be acted upon, but we are happy to hear comments from the public as well as from my fellow board members during this public comment section. Let's first go to Carson City. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to make public comment?
Good morning, Chair Hendrick, members Watkins and Assad, Dan Reeser, Fenimore, 7800 Ranchera Parkway, Reno, Nevada. Yesterday I had the opportunity while in these hollowed halls to bump into senior agent Joanne Chamberlain, who informed me that her great come and get it day had finally arrived and she would be retiring. I felt remiss if I did not this morning thank her for her service to the state of Nevada. And I'm sure the board members and other staff know she has been a wonderful agent to work with in many, many investigations I have had. Her strengths are to aggressively but civilly pursue the facts wherever they lead. And when investigation interviews became perhaps tense or tedious, with her wry sense of humor, to break the ice and get agents or get applicants to speak. So anyway, I wanted to spend just a couple moments singing her praises and wishing her well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeser. Anyone else in Carson City wishing to make public comment? Seeing none, we'll go here to Las Vegas. Public comment, please step up to the table. Seeing none, we will close the public comment section of the meeting and we will go into our one item of business, which is in general to look at the policies and procedures and as open as we can pursuant to Nevada's open meeting law, anything to do with the investigative division of the Gaming Control Board. As we did with the technology workshop, if any of you saw those, I asked the other board members to sit down with me in the well today rather than up on the dais with the sense of trying to have this be an open conversation rather than an up and down to a dais. We're really looking forward to a conversation more than a back and forth, just us listening. So we brought in a whiteboard today with the idea of we want to take down some action items. And due to the requirements of the open meeting law and us having to have this recorded, we will still have to have you come up to the microphone. So I'll be asking first, we'll start with Chief Hoffman, the chief of the investigative division, who can set the table for us on where we're at in terms of investigations. And yes, Chief, if you don't mind, you can come up to the table. That way we get it more recorded. We are not having a transcriber on this meeting, but for open meeting law purposes, we will be saving the audio and video of that. And that's why you have to come up to the microphone so that we can record everything. As I stated, the idea here is a conversation, a collaborative effort. I don't believe there's anything wrong with the investigative division. That's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is we think we're doing everything right, but we're certainly willing to learn and grow. If anybody believes that all the jurisdictions that are available now in the United States and around the world, if other jurisdictions are doing something that might be a good suggestion for the state of Nevada, we want to hear that. If there's other things that you've learned by going through the process in the state of Nevada, we want to hear about that too, with the idea that we can learn and grow as well. I will say one caveat that I said for the technology workshop, which is I'm going to enforce a 1-to-1 ratio, which means you can come up with one complaint, but you got to come up with one solution as well. So happy to hear anything you got to say, but we're looking for solutions, not just problems. With that, I've kind of set the stage for you, Chief Hoffman. Please give us an intro and tell us where we are today in the investigative division.
Okay, well, Chief Hoffman here. This is a bad sign.
Is that mic on?
I believe so. It's green.
It is. Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Just by way of introduction, to get things rolling, one, I'll refer to the overview of the division by reference from yesterday. If people want to see that, it's at the very end of the meeting on YouTube. Today, my introduction will be to talk a little bit about our agendas and the length of our investigations. And then following our input from the public, I'll have some closing remarks about why we do what we do and why we're different from some other jurisdictions. So our agendas lately, these are not hard statistics. These are more observations from me, someone who's involved with this on a monthly basis or daily even. Lately, we've been getting 8 to 15 items, non-restricted items on the agenda. And we've been getting between 10 and 15 restricted items on the agenda. Now, yesterday was 7, but that's because one dropped off from non-restricted. And how we do that, we triage. We give priority to new properties that are opening up, ones that are going to, employ Nevadans and that are going to add to the economy. We also give priority to time-sensitive things such as 4080 waivers and limited licenses that are going to expire. And then we have large transactions that are good for Nevada's economy, like the purchase of the Venetian or the Mirage or Cosmo. But we also pay close attention to some of the smaller operators. A good example would be Truckee Gaming that was on the agenda yesterday. A lot of Northern Nevada properties staked there and good for the economy. We also pay close attention. We sometimes have emergency rush cases. A good example would be the 5 truck stops, maybe that was about 6 months ago, that were threatened with closing down and would have put a lot of people out of work. So we have cases like that where it's all hands on board, drop everything and throw a team at that. And that does result in some other stuff getting pushed back. But I think it's safe to say that we are not holding up new properties opening. We are working with the industry to keep the economy going and keep people employed. We had the Durango on last month. We've got Fontainebleau next month. Accommodating the opening dates of those properties. Of course, we always want applications to come in to give us plenty of time to do our job. Lengths of investigations. Again, this is observational rather than statistical. Basic applications such as transfers of interest among known licensees, so 8020, individuals with simple finances and few jurisdictions to check, small operations. Those are taking between 3 and 6 months from the completion of the application. And I want to emphasize completion, that we don't consider an application filed until all the application paperwork is with applicant services. There's a lot of times where lawyers or applicants will throw something into applicant services and they'll use that as their start date. And sometimes it'll take some months to give applicant services what's really needed. So that's something to keep in mind. Complex applications, we maybe 8030 transfers where you've got a transfer of interest to somebody unknown, somebody who is not licensed yet, individuals with complex finances in multiple jurisdictions to check, foreign operation in foreign locations, large operations, multi-layered holding companies and or trusts, going 3, 4, 5 layers deep, complex sources of financing or funds, and large property openings with complex pre-opening cash. Fontainebleau would be a perfect example of that. Luckily, we were given a lot of lead time on that. Those are taking between 7 to 12 months, closer to the 12-month. Although I will say we had a foreign company, a company from Austria, that purchased the Sparks Nugget. And so it's a large foreign investigation, a lot of individuals, never been through the system before, some complexity to the purchase agreements and the financing. My team got that done in about 8 months from the time it was filed. And the reason why it went smoothly was because we had total cooperation from the applicants and from the seller as well. For restricted, turnaround is getting better on simple, complete applications. Again, transfers of interest among licensees, space leases. You're going to see a handful of those on every agenda. My agents are tackling the more complex stuff and at the same time trying to knock out some of the more simple stuff to get that stuff moving, to try and reduce the backlog there. The ones that are taking more time, of course, are the multiple layer holding companies. I touched on it yesterday, where you have a tavern and you have our regs for minority equity interest holders. Restricted is more designed for maybe a simple corporation or an LLC or even a sole proprietorship owning a tavern. But what we're getting is multiple layer holding companies using the minority equity interest holder regs and requiring vast amounts of resources, my team's part, and those are bogging down the system and taking a lot of time. So anybody filing those can expect those to take a long time. For restricted, there is a backlog. You'll see actually from yesterday's agenda, for a while there, it was taking 9 to 12 months to get even some basic stuff on. But you'll notice, I noticed on yesterday's agenda that it's getting more towards 6 to 9 months. So there's some improvement there, and we're working to improve that even more. Not long ago, I added an extra agent to the restricted team. That team, when it's at capacity, has 7 agents and 1 supervisor. Made sure we have a special agent there to assist the supervisor with running that team. And unfortunately, though, it's like Sisyphus, where you're staffing wise, you get one person on the team, and then you have something happens and they have to go off the team, or they have to take a time out for health issues. So it's a constant battle to keep any team fully staffed. Restricted, you really notice it because I have 1 restricted team. If cases, and this is again a real generality, but if cases start to exceed 12 months, a lot of times it's because we're not getting the cooperation we need. Not always, but a lot of the time. So in general, if people are wondering why something's taking so long, say you're a property and you want to use somebody's product and their application's taking a long time to get through the system, you might want to ask the provider of that product what's going on. We're, our investigations are confidential, and we're not allowed to give any information about why something's taking a lot of time. The communication is strictly confidential between us and the applicant. So there's not a lot we can let out there, and rightly so. Let's see. I think that's pretty much all I have regarding agendas and lengths of investigations. And so if there are no questions about what I've just said, then I'll turn it over to input from the public.
I think I'm going to have some questions, Chief, but I think I'd like to hear from the public, and we'll see if we can meld those questions together, because I'm definitely going to ask you about staffing and speed. So unless the other board members have questions at this point, let's go ahead and open it up for public questions and comments.
We can incorporate that in. I have some closing remarks as well,
okay,
so we can incorporate questions with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I should have also said for the record, as I mentioned, this needs to be a collaborative effort. We are looking for some action items, but pursuant to MATA open meeting law, we will not be voting on anything today. This is purely discussion, but that's again why I started by saying that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a conversation. So with that, I would open it up now to anybody in the public who wishes to come forward and give us your thoughts on the investigative process or anything else regarding the investigative division. Is there anybody wishing to speak? Mr. Reeser, let's start with you.
Good morning, Chair Hendrick, Member Watkins, and Assad, Dan Reeser with Fenimore. Functioning as amicus, I am not here on behalf of any clients. I want to make that clear. So any of my comments should not be attributed to a client or a past application. I have about 10 items I'd like to discuss with you briefly. I'm approaching these with a constructive suggestion that the chair previously gave. The first is I'd like to highlight some practices that many of your agents already do that should, I think, be like standard operating procedure. That it may well be standard operating procedure, but isn't always done. And I view these as like little customer service efforts that make a big difference in the applicant's view of what's going on. First, once applicant services has, and I agree with Chief Hoffman because I've been in that situation, you submit everything, your client tells you, oh, this one form will be done, and you chase them for 90 days to get it done. And so the application isn't complete. But once it's done, not always, but many times, applicant services will just drop you an email or send you or call you and say, we're done. It's complete. And that, I think, should be kind of a SOP where you're telling Gaming Council or the applicant that, yes, we consider the thing done from the application standpoint. Recently, since Chair Hoffman, Chief Hoffman took over, this procedure's been pretty routine, where you actually get a notice, hey, I've been assigned, usually by email, to the applicant, and if they have counsel, to counsel, I've been assigned and we're activating. And in many instances, the agent has a tentative agenda date. Now, I regularly counsel clients, tentative agenda date begins with the word tentative. But they've told you it's going to be July of 2024. Don't go on vacation. And it also helps Gaming Council and if you have compliance folks with what I call the 4040 process with your client, which is, okay, you're under investigation. Has anything changed since you filed your application 4 months ago, or 6 months ago, or sometimes 7 months ago? And as the investigation's going on, at least my practice is to regularly send 4040 memos to my client saying, has anything changed in the last 6 weeks? And if you have no idea when the agenda date is, sending those repeatedly to the applicant gets to be an irritation. So if they know in their own mind that there is this likely tentative date, they get more engaged in the process. There was, and I attribute it in part to the pandemic, a period of time when we were not, at least Gaming Council were not getting regularly closing conferences by telephone or email. That process, that hiatus seems to be cured, but I think closing conferences have, there's a long tradition of those, and I don't think they should be done away with. They are important in getting ready for the agenda and making sure that when you three are sitting and when the 5 commissioners are sitting, that whoever's doing the presentation, applicant or counsel, is focused on what is in your report and what is important. We regularly use at Fenimore, not regularly, we don't do an application anymore without a data room. All of the applicant's materials go into a data room. They are bait stamped, they're indexed according to subject matter, or when we get document request letters, they are synced up to that. And we're not using paper with applicants anymore. And I encourage the board to embrace that process if it is not fully embraced. And we probably should look, I don't have a solution for you, but we should probably look for ways to use data rooms even when you don't have a law firm that's marshaling the application. Finally, on these communication issues, I encourage supervisors to have agents always copy counsel when they communicate directly to the applicant. I don't try to rope off or screen off my applicants, but many of them hire us not to be bothered or to be the first cut on something. And when we're not copied on, hey, where is this document, which we may be chasing down, not the applicant, we're not able to fully bridge the gap between the board and the applicant. The next issue I'd like to hit on is the restricted program process and some thoughts from experience. Pinch points, I would call them. None of these are criticisms, they're just suggestions for, as Chair Hendricks said, solutions. One of the considerations you might want to give is if a SRO, a slot route operator, is in front of you with a space lease, that you streamline the application and you fast track it in some way to get back to that historic 60 to 90 days that an SRO can get through the process. Whereas there's a space lease, there shouldn't, and you've licensed the SRO, they're just simply doing a 161 placement of slots at somebody else's location, and the revenue is all going to the slot route operator other than the rental revenue. And so that might be one way to take some of those applications and get them to agenda faster. I also think that and I don't have the full solution. I'm happy to work on that, but there should be perhaps a short form application or fast tracking process with the objective of a 90 to 120 days for restricted locations where you have the same individual applicants and that they have been reviewed within recent memory and the same ownership structure. While the percentages may be slightly different, you have the same people you've looked at for ownership. And the only real change may be that they've used a special purpose vehicle, new entity for that location. But it has no history. It's been recently created with the Secretary of State, and so it doesn't have any corporate history to look at. And see if there maybe is a profile of applications there that could move ahead faster. My clients probably will cringe at the following, but it is a truthful statement. The board needs to probably revisit the investigative fee structure for restricteds. It is not even remotely compensable for the resources at $150 per hour for an agent, at $1,050. There's not very much room in there to do an investigation. I understand the reason for the pricing here, but during the pandemic, we were routinely told, hey, we don't have the resources to marshal here from a financial standpoint to throw money at faster restricted processing. And understand budget restrictions, but you may want to strongly consider whether $1,050 for an investigative fee is enough for restricteds, and you may want to determine whether there are tiers or categories of restricteds where you assign a different investigative fee. And some other folks may not agree with this, but I believe you may want to also consider a fast track highway toll fee, investigative fee, that moves somebody who can demonstrate some need, financial or operational, opening, a new major flagged restaurant or something that has heavy duty financing with it, and they don't want disruption of putting in the slot machines 6 months later, those types of things, where they could pay a fee. I'm just throwing out a number, $25,000 to get fast track consideration. Finally, on just forms for restricted, I think you may want to consider eliminating Form 21 if the applicant has financial statements for at least the preceding 12 months. The way the form is written is if you're a new operation or you have only been in operation for 12 months. Well, if you've been in operation for 12 months, you may have financial statements for that first 12 months. And a Form 21 really is not very helpful when you actually have financial statements from actual operations for at least a year. Moving off of restricted, I'd encourage you to revisit Form 6 to make sure that all of the data and metrics that are in that form are still necessary and are actually used in pre-opening analysis. When I'm helping, Form 6s are probably one of the leading delays. They are actually one of the forms that you file the rest of the application, and the CFOs and the outside accountants are still working on the Form 6, and it doesn't necessarily come in with the application all the time at the same time, and that delays things. And I'd also suggest we need to reevaluate whether a Form 6 should be required outside the instance of a new location, or could it be streamlined where you actually have an existing location that's being acquired. Typically, I always just tell them prepare a Form 6, but if you don't, you're going to get asked for it. And so I think we need to look at whether a Form 6 is really necessary. We have an operating company, operating property, which you have financial statements for. Those are probably more helpful than the Form 6. You would probably have to, though, add something on sources and uses of cash to replace that for an acquisition. I may be ignorant of this, but a number of years ago, Chair Burnett publicly sent out a notice about what was called the 2-year rule. And I would encourage a reaffirmation of the 2-year rule, which is if you have an individual applicant who's completed their Form 7 and 7A within the previous 2 years and been investigated on it, you don't have to refile that Form 7 or 7A within that 2-year. You may even want to consider going to a 3-year. And then all you do is you update the personal financial, the 1 page typically of the Form 7 that has their net worth statement. On Reg 4080, I would encourage the board and the commission to revisit it and consider granting to the chair of the board power to do 4080 waivers. In many instances, the need for a 4080 waiver does not, and as Chief Hoffman indicated, they do give priority. It doesn't arise with any reasonable time period to get on the agenda, and places both a burden on investigations and the license holder or the approval holder. And in many instances that I've had, it's New York Council hasn't gotten the loan document done, and they're not going to get it done till 4 weeks after the 4080 time period runs. Well, allowing the chair to give a month or 6 weeks to get some part of the documentation necessary without doing a 4080 for the loan aspects of a transaction or whatnot would, and context is like a pledge agreement, would I think be helpful. If anything is considered a criticism, the following can be. I would encourage the board and the commission either apply Regulation 8020 as it is written or change it. 8020, this goes back to when I was chief deputy, was a different process back then. And it was, as the regulation is written, a very streamlined process when you were doing transfers among licensees. It was basically file, tell us about this, and if we don't object, it's approved. That's the way the reg's still written, but the language of the reg does allow it to be forced to agenda. And now it typically always, I'm not aware of it ever not going to agenda, just like an 8030. If there is a public policy reason not to follow the regulation the way it's written, or at least the intent of it to fast track 8020s, then we should probably revisit that regulation and write it the way you intend it to be operated. I also think that we should look at Reg 8070. Because of the open meeting law required of the commission, it is really, in my personal experience, too cumbersome to address many emergency situations, because you have to you got to get to at least 3 commissioners. To get to 3 commissioners, you have to hold a public hearing. And so, yes, you might be able to get 3 commissioners within just 4 or 5 days, but that's pretty difficult with their schedules and difficult for the board to actually process something for them to read. So I think, and here I admit I don't have the solution because I don't know all of the internal considerations that the board has, but would be happy to work with anybody who's interested on trying to come up with a better mousetrap on 8070. I also don't have a solution for Reg 9, other than to say we need to go back and reform Reg 9. And I'm going to suggest that you may want a working group that includes members of the probate and trusts section of the state bar, because these people are the ones that are regularly calling known gaming counsel in the community and saying, I got a problem with this estate, and you have to tell them, you got a problem in spades, and it isn't going to be solved quickly. And they're saying, well, the probate judge wants a solution now, and you're going to have to say, well, I can't give them something now. And so there's a bunch of considerations. The state legislature has dramatically changed the probate code with a lot of fast track mechanisms in it. We probably need to sit down and brainstorm a better way to handle all of the different issues in Reg 9. The following are two questions. Do we really need Reg 16 115 shelf approvals? If the public company has a federal shelf approval, is there really a public policy need for 16 115 any longer? And additionally, Deputy Chief Teggio is right in front of me, and I say this with all respect, do we really need 16 310 reviews of proxy statements? I don't even know how much of that's still going on, but you have a licensee and a registrant. They should, if they screw up their proxy statement and say something wrong, then you ought to discipline them for it. But I'm not sure we need to any longer be in that space. And then finally, one pinch point. I applaud the NGC 9 process. There is just one aspect of it. I just want to point out that I think many of your licensees are struggling, at least the telephone calls I get. They struggle with a 172, a 463, 172 transfer approval, which used to be all done by lawyers sending letters to the chair, and I'm not suggesting going back to that. It may be, NGC 9 is not transparent to gaming counsel, so we don't know that we have the client explain to us what they're seeing on the screen and how to navigate it, but we're not actually there to do it with them. And so I get a fair number, I'd say half a dozen a year. I'm trying to do a 172, get the chairman to approve a transfer into my family trust of these shares. And I can't figure out how to do it on NGC 9. So maybe they just need more instructions or some kind of a guidance on that. But that's one final pinch point I would point out. I thank you for having the opportunity to present these. They're all from personal experience, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I would also say, do not take any offense if I leave early on you. It's because I have a 11:30 in Reno.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Reeser. All very good points. I counted more than 10, but maybe there were some sub points in there that you've obviously gone through the process many times. So having that expertise is very valuable for this group and the board to hear from today. I would say that I don't know if great minds are thinking alike, if I could give myself that much credit, or if you've been looking over my shoulder, because there's 4 or 5 of these that I've been thinking about as well. Data rooms, fast tracking some SROs where it's the same individuals involved. The word I was going to use was toll roads, fast tracking. But I also appreciate where you're talking about. One of the main things I've been asking the staff to do across the Gaming Control Board is if there is something we're asking for that we don't actually need once we get it, or we're not reviewing it to a full extent once we get it, let's stop asking for it. So to the extent some of your questions about some of the forms and the data required fall into that category, absolutely want to look into that. I hadn't really thought about Reg 9. If you're telling us that the probate bar is having trouble with some of our processes, I absolutely agree that us getting together with a working group with probate attorneys makes sense. We don't want to be slowing down such an important process of people's lives. So we need to look into that as well. Board members, did you have questions for Mr. Reeser at this point?
I don't have any questions, but Mr. Reeser, I appreciate the time you took to go through our regs and combine your review with your experience to better inform us in our decision making. It's very helpful here today. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Appreciate the input and your vast knowledge and experience. Maybe some point down the road a little bit, you might be able to compile a list of some regs that we can completely eliminate. And these, I presume, are ones that you want to modify, but I still think there are some regs that definitely could be completely eliminated.
And thank you again for your pro
Thank you.
bono work today. Yeah, good. Anybody else wishing to provide testimony? Mr. Dorsey.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Member Watkins, Member Assad, Madam Secretary. Darren Dorsey, the Executive Director of the Association of Gaming Equipment Manufacturers, AGEM. It's funny that Mr. Reeser is sitting there because I don't think all of this is pro bono, but it is clear that there was a discussion. This has been an ongoing discussion, and first and foremost, on behalf of the supplier sector in our entire industry, these are the kinds of collaborative conversations that we want to have about all aspects of this, because when we improve this, it improves it for licensees, for people, new potential people coming into the industry, for your staff, for your team. It makes it better for everybody. Because I think that's the view that we've been looking at this from, is we've been doing these processes this way for a long time, but do we need to? What are ways that we possibly can change? And what are things are we really looking for? What's necessary? Because there's a whole lot out there, because gaming's beyond Nevada's borders in a lot of different places. And there's a lot of other ways that the industry is being licensed, is being regulated in other places. So the first thing I would want to point out, I don't want to retread some ground that Mr. Reeser talked about. But first and foremost, is maybe following up to this meeting, have some type of, people can submit additional comments now that you have laid the table on these. There are specific regulation references that might be there, specific forms that might be maybe unnecessary, duplicative, or are difficult. If there was an open-ended period for 2 weeks, 30 days before we got back together, there might be forms. It was on my list of items. I've been through that process both as the lawyer, as an executive at a gaming company, and figuring out, or there's the same information being asked for in a different form or format in different places. There might be some things that might be unnecessary or duplicative. The one item, maybe I put things together in maybe just at a higher level than getting into the more concrete details that Mr. Reeser talked about, is whether that's with the chiefs. This is a collaborative process, but what I would say is, I hear what Chief Hoffman was talking about, and I think it's important that we maybe figure out or establish some types of guidelines or periods of time, meaning if you need something from a licensee to complete that application and it's not getting there to you, when the board or the staff or the agent that's assigned to a particular matter, I need this in 10 days. Get this to me in 10 days, because we're all working off of that same date. If there's that back and forth, and like the chief talked about, hey, this isn't a completed application, I can't, your time clock doesn't start. If everyone, maybe can we publish some or create some type of whatever expectations those are, so that everybody's working from the same playbook, because priority list or those things, those would be at least comfortable for compliance departments, for your agents, for the board, for timelines to get on an agenda. I don't know what those necessarily are. I apologize for not having a specific solution, but I don't really know what the staffing needs and those things were there. If we need this, is that 5 days? Is that 10 days? Is it 30 days? at least establishing some of that would be helpful for everybody on both sides of that. I also think, and it picked up on what Mr. Reeser talked about, what you talked about, I know what the chief talked about earlier. Is this a point in time where Nevada, we need to start thinking about waivers or some type of notice provision for a number of transactions? We talk about transactions or transfers of interest between existing known licensees, and if that's a 6-month time period, but is that really necessary for purposes of Nevada's regulatory overview and oversight? Because these are existing licensees that are there. And is there some materiality that's involved, if as long as it doesn't create some type of market share or some type of financial materiality that's involved? Would that be something that's constructive, that it doesn't maybe take away time and resource from the investigations division to have to go and chase down, because these are known existing licensees that have already been through the process and been found suitable in Nevada? That might open up some time. And I don't know if that's a conversation that is a regulation change, like you mentioned, Member Assad, or is it just a policy change? I echo what Mr. Reeser talked about. I know this legislative session had to address certain things in the estate planning process. There's a lot of much more sophistication on things for estate planning purposes, and maybe kind of think about that when you've got contingent beneficiaries or estate planning issues of having to get all the way down there to do an investigation. Maybe create another framework where those things aren't investigated until that contingency comes to pass. It's just an example. It happens out there. That's might bog some things down or require investigations to be a little bit more extensive. I know something that would be I don't want to speak for operators, but I do know that it's important with suppliers. Is there an idea, or is there a possibility, because people do move from licensee to licensee? You have key executives, you might have board members, you have people that have individual suitability findings, key employees, whatever they are. Is there a guideline or framework we wish to establish that if that's such period, if someone has had a finding of suitability that's been investigated, approved, gone before the board and commission, is that 2 years? Is that 3 years? Is that some type of 4 years, that it can be portable with something? Because not only is that a use, is that necessarily required for purposes of Nevada, and what we're really looking for, but at the same time, is existing regulatory oversight and known of those persons, because once someone is a licensee, you're still getting semi-annual reports, annual reports, and information about those particular individuals. Is that a possibility that we might want to explore? And making those not just maybe portable, but at the same time extend the life of those before have to go read an investigation or an update. Is there a period of time that might be constructive that we don't need to investigate somebody? I have a feeling, and I don't want to speak for the chief or I know there's policies and there's discretionary issues that are there, and they're always working through that based on priorities and but maybe do we want to establish some type of parameters so that the agents and those people aren't in a box of having to make a call every single time, and at least say what the board and the commission is comfortable with, so that it's the same for everyone, and they're maybe not having to address that on a time by time, each particular applicant that comes up. Because you might get different answers depending on where you're at with priority. And that's maybe not fair to put the agents or the chiefs in those situations. I also had a comment about the Reg 15, Reg 16, especially the Reg 16 on publicly traded companies. Mr. Reeser mentioned shelf approvals, certain amendments of orders of registration, things that might be deemed perfunctory, but they still require every 3 years for a shelf renewal or whatever those time periods are. I've been a little out of practice, so I probably get some time periods wrong there, but these are publicly traded companies. You're getting all of their publicly released financial information. You're getting compliance committee notes every year. You're in the middle of that operation. Mr. Rippey's involved in having multiple year audits of those things. Are there things that we're asking or requiring of corporate licensees on a periodic basis that might simply be unnecessary, but they still might take up some time for the investigative teams or the agents teams to chase those down, when really, is that something that the board and the commission are really wanting to see? And I don't know, but at least there's the possibility of some flexibility there. And I would also kind of come back to that process of maybe a materiality threshold and moving to a more notice type process on a lot of maybe transactions or certain things that may not require a formal approval. Those maybe just be out of date. Some of the numbers and amounts contained in those may be out of date because of where we are in 2023, and they may have been established in 2005. So $5 million, $1 million, maybe different amounts today than they were, but it might be taking up time and resources when it's not something that's required. But I also pick up on what Mr. Reeser said, and I'm sure everybody would say, it's a different time, and whatever we can use technology-wise as a licensee for the ongoing process, as an applicant for the agency, finding out ways to use technology to get information back and forth, because everyone's personal information, getting that, how we track that stuff down, how we maintain it. Are there things that we're asking for that we really necessarily don't care about? Don't know. So I don't mean to be without sort of terms or solutions, but I know these are the issues that come up and confront, whether it's a licensee and they've got a transaction that's coming up, or some filing they need to do, or an executive or a key employee or a board member who's moved out of a notice place to an audit chair or a chairman of the board, but they may have been already approved in the last few years. These are expensive, time consuming activities. And by no means we're saying that they're, the regulatory oversight and scrutiny is important, but is that taking away some of the energy and the priorities for more material items or time sensitive or openings, things that require, big openings and jobs? Are we, is that the best allocation of resources? Because I know that the chiefs would say this, and I know that's all across the divisions, and I know we heard it in the technology as well. You've only got finite resources and finite team members within the agency, and to do all these things, rather than establishing a priority for things that we have to do, maybe there's some things that we don't necessarily want or need to do anymore, and can be doing so with a notice, some type of form filing process, instead of requiring a layered investigation. It takes away time and energy from the agents. But this isn't any kind of exhaustive list. I know a lot of other people, I would encourage that we maybe keep this as an ongoing dialogue. So if people have, hey, this form makes no sense, and you might hear from 10 different people that these forms are unnecessary, or you might even hear from your staff that we don't need that form. Maybe we'll all come to the same common point. But we hope this is an ongoing opportunity to engage, since we all recognize and respect how important the process, the investigation process, and getting and maintaining our Nevada licenses is. I mean, we recognize that importance. And so on behalf of AGEM and all of my members, we just appreciate the conversation and want to find ways to make this better for everybody involved, whether that's you, whether the commission, whether that's the CorpSec, investigations, compliance unit, everybody on this licensing and investigation process. So we want to be part of that solution, and any ways that we can.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. And yes, you're correct. This has got to be an ongoing conversation, because you can't solve it in one meeting, and we'll need some subgroups working and help from organizations like yours. So definitely appreciate that. I will say as well that us trying to get rid of things, you probably have already seen that with what we've done with foreign gaming requirements, and so many other things that we've been trying to do already in 2023 is exactly what you said, that just because we're requiring it to be submitted to us, if we're not then taking the time to go through it, that's what I'm empowering the agents to come up and say, we require this, but we just don't need it. And it actually creates work for us. Even if we do review it, we're not really going back to the licensees on very few occasions and saying, this is wrong or this needs updated. So completely agree with that. That's actually saving our agency time. So we have to keep looking for those type of things. Are there questions from board members for Mr. Dorsey?
I don't have questions, just a comment. And again, appreciate you coming here today to provide your input. I think it's very helpful and well taken. I like what you said about, understanding that we have guidelines that are more so informal. And we do have internal policies that we we kind of keep, especially as it relates to individual licensees who may just be transferring companies. We don't always do a full investigation. We might do an updated investigation for the last 2 years or something. And Chief Hoffman may be able to speak more particularly than that about it. But I think establishing more formalized measures could be helpful. That's something that I'm willing to consider as it relates to especially individual licensees. So thank you for saying that and appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. Appreciate you being here. With regard to, you mentioned eliminating some duplicative forms. Maybe you could identify some of those forms for us, and then we could take a look at that. I think that'd be a great idea. Eliminate as much as we can. You said waivers or notice on some particular items, some regs with certain cases. Again, if you could give us some examples of that specifically. And with regard to the estate planning that you mentioned, do you suggesting maybe just extending the time period for them to notify us and do the transfer that they're supposed to do, or some other ideas along those lines?
I think it's a combination of things, Member Assad. I mean, Mr. Reeser referred to it as, things happen at the back end that people aren't prepared for this, but also you might have people that have gaming interest or entities that have gaming interest that might have all kinds of layers of contingent beneficiaries or things of that nature as part of estate plans. For that approval to go through, it has to go all the way down. There might be, if there's contingent beneficiaries and they don't necessarily have the equity interest there standing there today, we can simply not do have a policy to wait further along the lines for that to happen. That's just an example that came up in a few other conversations with people within my organization and elsewhere. I just think that, and I don't want to speak for Chief Hoffman or anyone else on that particular item, but I just know that how sophisticated estate planning is today and the structure of financial innovation associated with companies, our regs and our processes tend to be aimed at something that are a little more simple. You have a corporation, a limited liability company, a trust. But if you look at the layers that are involved in this, they become much, much more complex. And the issues that have to be chased down may not come to pass or may not come into being, but they might tie up a particular transaction or an investigation, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I think it makes sense, like what Mr. Reeser talked about. There's a lot of this that's involved because we have gaming here, and gaming interest within family estate planning or financial estate planning, for lack of a better term. Are there ways that we need to mirror from what you as a board and your team, your agents are looking for to make that mirrored? And then we have a process that chases that forward. Like, what are we really getting at? What do we really want to have here? Do we need a full investigation of this situation, or do we just need some disclosures right now? And we'll deal with that down the road for something to come to pass.
I think the couple of cases we've had just dealt with the beneficiary of the estate just not knowing that they had to notify us of the transfer. And so that's one aspect of it, is just notifying the public at large, as well as the beneficiaries of these licensees when a death occurs, that they need to notify, and maybe also notify the estate planning attorneys bar, that a lot of them probably aren't even aware of those requirements. So that's probably one thing we should take a look at as well. And then the shelf approvals, are you recommending maybe just extending the time period out for 3 years, 4 years, or?
Well, in my individual capacity, I don't know why they're necessarily required on the tempo that they are. And I defer to Chief Hoffman. Is 3 years enough time? Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? I don't know, because you've also got a publicly traded company that might have something existing between the exchange rules that they're listed on, that it's already there. It just comes up every 3 years, and then you're having to renew, do the investigation. And I don't know if there's a lot that ever is extracted from that, if that's by itself. Maybe it's, and again, I don't have any kind of, I apologize that there's not a firm solution. And This
That's
is
not
a complaint.
required.
It's not a problem,
Yeah,
right? It's just something that I know that the agents have to chase down.
Mhm.
It's something that, you've got a revolving fund that's there. You're something that comes up, and it's with the way that our regs are written.
Mhm.
But are we getting at what we're really looking for from a process standpoint? And I just simply don't know. I know as a PTC,
Mhm.
you're dealing with it as you work through it. And is it necessary? It might be longer periods of time, Member Assad. That might be the issue.
Mhm. Okay. And then you mentioned something about more notice, only on some things, more technology and so forth. Clorox bleach, I don't know if you saw this morning, they were hacked by the same group that hacked MGM and Caesar, Scattered Spider, and their stock took a big hit today. And they've lost multi millions of dollars because they can't get their product to the shelves, Clorox, because of the hacking. So with respect to maybe more technology on your end, I know you're more in the manufacturers and that part of it, but even from that perspective, maybe the technology folks, even through AGEM, but also through the hotels that have their own security protocols, they should be looked at. I think that should be kind of a priority for the industry, AGEM, all of us moving forward. This seems to be something that's going to be plaguing society as a whole, as well as this particular industry. These hackers, unless they get stopped, they're just not going to stop. So I don't see anybody getting arrested here recently or in the near future, and they're just going to keep coming. So maybe you guys in the technology area can keep that in mind when you're trying to develop new product or put a new item before us, and then maybe work with the casinos too. That's it.
Understood, Mr. Member Assad. Understood.
I would think too, Mr. Dorsey, that because you and the members of your organization have been through so many application processes in so many different jurisdictions, one of the other things I would ask you to do is, as we form a working group or continue this conversation, I can't fix the multi-jurisdictional forms, but maybe it's time again that we get together with that group across the country and decide. And I'm not saying it is, I just know it's been several years since it's been looked at. What I'd be interested in is, are all these jurisdictions asking for more than they need? And if they're not, that's fine. But your side of that application process is going to know a lot more than our side. Our side's going to say, we think we need all this. And then we can look at it and say, do we really need it? But your side could also be part of that conversation and say, we've already submitted this, or this hasn't changed. And are we filling this out just over and over and over? So I want that to be part of the conversation as well. It's a little bigger than Nevada, but I think it should be part of the conversation.
Oh, good, and we appreciate that. I mean, I think it's a very fair point. And I think to a company, to an individual, there is because when you're carrying 290 plus licenses, or even in my role previous as an executive at a publicly traded slot manufacturer, I'm carrying 100 approvals, and that means tax return, all of that information that's gone out to a lot of different places. I'm fortunate enough to never had any kind of negative, but it's going out and what is really necessary. And that's helpful if the regulatory authorities and the agents that are doing this on a day-to-day basis, here's the issues that we're really focused in and key on. And maybe you don't want to necessarily describe that because it takes away some of your discretionary authority or making sure people are being transparent and forthright with you. But is it financial information? Is it criminal history and personal history? Those are the things that we really want to get to the bottom of, or that feedback is helpful for us as an industry to understand what you really need. So if we can ferret some of that out and maybe at least get some guidance or some information out there to a larger group other than just the licensees going through the process at that particular time, if AGEM can be helpful in that, we certainly will be.
Right. And I understand that as you're going through the process, it's generally not something that you'd want to do in the middle of the process to say to the regulators, do you really need that? So that's why I want to have these conversations in a much more macrocosm atmosphere of, let's ask the questions now, because when you're in the process, that's a very difficult question to ask. Mr. Reeser, I know you're going to have to leave us in a while, but one of the things I want to touch on before you leave, you mentioned data rooms. And while Mr. Dorsey's here, I want to ask you, you just mentioned that you've got, or you had 100 different licenses. How did you keep all that information, one, safe? How did you keep it available? And how did you provide it on an ongoing, updated basis?
Well, I could speak from personal experience, and that is every company, whether that's a large manufacturer or a smaller has a process. They might be contracting with a third-party supplier that has a platform that allows for that, so that the data is sort of housed within a firewall in one particular place, so that knowing that if I've got 100 applications that have to get out for this particular individual, whether it's a key employee, whether that's a new officer and director, or whether that's a new chairman of the board, it populates many of those applications and then remits those. It takes the data, the hard data, it has to be input once, but then it can be sent out and you can create the form so that you're not manually creating hundreds of applications over and over and over again. So that's a technology solution that a lot of manufacturers have created themselves or built themselves within their own architecture and their own infrastructure, or utilize, there's some third-party providers that provide those platforms and solutions.
So I like the idea that the manufacturer's doing that, or the operator. How do you know that when you disseminate it out to, let's just say 15 jurisdictions, not less, not even close to 100, does it automatically go to them, or are we back to paper? And Chief, I'm going to ask you this question as well. I'll ask you the 15, I'll ask you the 1. How do you know you're getting out to 15? Does it got to be one at a time?
So
Well, Dan,
Go ahead, Dan.
I'll elaborate on the process we use. We have a third-party vendor who provides a data room technology to us, but we administer it internally. And as to documents, we file into there, we index and file into their electronic copies of the applications. And then as documents are requested and produced, they come to a paralegal, and the paralegal makes sure that it's responsive to what the board is asked for, and indexes it. If the board has provided if the Nevada board has provided a method of indexing that they want followed, we follow that. And if not, then we provide our own. Then we bait stamp each page of the document and put it in there. We then provide a password, essentially, to the agents at the board. The other persons having passwords are the paralegal, the gaming partner on the matter, and the applicant. And the applicant can designate, and frequently does, a staff person that works for them that can do so. And then if the applicant asks, which they do from time to time, can you admit this agent in Mississippi or this agent in Massachusetts to look at the same documents? Once the applicant approves that, and we correspond with that agent in the other jurisdiction, then we give them also password protected access to the same file.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, Dan, is once you load that up, can you keep it up for the next jurisdiction or the next 14? Let me ask you, Chief, just because I'm ignorant to this point, are we still requiring paper documents here, or are we requiring that everything be loaded up?
Answer is neither. I mean, we are not requiring paper. We're happy to deal with digital documents, and we do a lot. And we're always happy to see things arranged the way Dan is doing it. But what we have run into is some of the less sophisticated applicants, companies that just don't care. They do a data dump and they just throw it all into one database. The agent is overwhelmed with trying to sort out what is in there and what isn't, and just trying to find stuff. Now, if it, we're happy to accept stuff if it's well organized, and I'm sure Dan's clients stuff is, but sometimes it's a nightmare. And on that. When we get into that, that's when we say, no, if you can't organize your digital submissions properly, then you better just give us paper.
Yeah, makes sense. You have anything to add to that, Darren?
I would add on the applicant or the licensee perspective, it's not in the where you refer to it as you've put that data there and then it's just sent. There's still a oversight review, and a majority of jurisdictions still are not even allowing electronic signatures. So it has to be notarized. It has to be a hard signature, and maybe that document can be sent, but then other things can be sent electronically, password protected, or sent in some form that are an encryption. It just depends on the level of sophistication and the wants and needs of a particular regulator. Because a manufacturer, supplier that's licensed in Nevada also has to, whether that's Illinois, whether that's Massachusetts, whether that's Mississippi, but also all the tribal authorities around the US, Canadian provinces, everyone does it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so the data is the same, but how you get that, manage it, and maintain it is different.
And
So I think you mentioned that earlier, and that's something that we as an industry would love to find a way to where those roads narrow and become a little bit easier pathways for people to navigate, so that it's the similar process and the same information
right.
for a lot of different
Yeah,
places.
we certainly don't want to be housing this data. And my understanding, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, once a application is completed and approved or denied or anything else, we delete the data. We don't house data here that could be suitable to hacking.
You're correct. The only thing that survives an investigation once all approvals happen is the investigative report that we create, the summary.
Which has got personal data redacted out of it already. Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
We obviously, if something's referred back to staff, or has a limited approval, we're going to keep more stuff than something that's got a final approval. But yeah, we keep as little as possible for safety reasons and also just management reasons. We'd be buried in data and paper if we kept everything that we go through.
Right. But back to my earlier question, we're at the stage in 2023 that if the applicant is housing their data in a data room, that actually makes your division's job easier, assuming that it's properly organized.
Absolutely.
Not killing trees, not shipping paper back and forth. To your point about wet signatures, that was my next question, Mr. Dorsey or Mr. Reeser, is Nevada, Chief, requiring wet signatures on anything at this point? Or is there any way we can go to digital if we are?
Not requiring wet signatures.
Great, good. We solved that one off my list right there today. Good deal. One down.
I didn't hear that. So we're not requiring wet blue signature?
I'm
Great.
Yeah. Dan, repeat that again. I missed the end of what you said.
I think he said blue.
Wet and blue signatures, because it's always at the top of the form. So
No, and applicant services coordinator Barry Chilton can correct me if I'm misspeaking, but I'm pretty sure that we're accepting digital.
Yeah, this is Barry Chilton, coordinator of applicant services, and we're not requiring wet signatures. We went to electronic signatures a few years ago during the pandemic because it was the only way we could continue doing business because so many things had shut down. But I would want to clear up one thing that we were talking about. We do have retention rules within the state, and so all the applications that are filed, we are required to keep those applications on file. However, the working documents, I think, is what we're talking about when we have drop boxes that the applicants send. So that the working documents, I think, is what we're talking about, that we don't keep all that type of information, but the initial applications that are filed requesting the approvals. So that would be our Form 1s, 2s, the 778s, disclosures, all that. Those all fall under our retention rules. And so there has been an issue with those in the past. We've been working with technology division to create a Dropbox unique to the board, and we're trying to get a solution for that so that we can get all of our applications done electronically. We were working with the applicants during the pandemic to receive as many applications as we could electronically. However, when we get some of these large applications, they do overload our IT systems. And because we were talking about cybersecurity and things, because of our firewalls, we can't accept files that are too large. So if we're talking about basic applications, we're able to take those in PDF form, things like that. But if we have extensive files that have been filed and put into a secure Dropbox by an attorney's office, those are problematic for us and for staff because of the way that we have to save information. So I've been working with everyone to try to streamline the process and make it as easy as possible, where I will allow small applications to be filed electronically, and staff's been able to deal with those. But if they're really, because we get applications that might take 10 banker's boxes sometimes. And when we get that volume of information, we still have to have it come in hard copies because of where we're at with the board with technology, and we don't have a system in place yet. And so I just wanted to make that clear that we're not retaining all the working documents, that those stay in those drop boxes that are provided by attorneys' offices and applicants. However, the initial applications by statute, we're required to retain those for up to 100 years. And we do.
Good. Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. And the most important thing I heard you say is that we're working on trying to modernize everything. So appreciate that.
And Barry, we do these big banker's boxes of application materials, after they're gone through, we do scan them and store them digitally, and we don't keep the piles.
Yeah.
That,
anyway,
that
we
is
can
correct.
save
Everything
trees.
is digitized. Everything is digitized.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Appreciate you being here and participating. Anybody else wishing to come up now and make comments? Yes, sir. Please step right up, Commissioner. Commissioner Marcantonis, happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, George Marcantonis for the record. Judge Assad, Dr. Watkins, Chair Hendricks. Thank you for letting me quickly have one comment. Listening to Mr. Dorsey and everybody else, it's been obviously very interesting for me, and I'm still learning as much as I possibly can. Chief Hoffman, I have been licensed twice, actually, Nevada, thank goodness. I've been through the process. It's been extremely professional and efficient. And once I was licensed out of the country. But one thing that I wanted to raise, which fascinates me and a lot of my colleagues, I'm very sure, in the world of operating the casino resorts, not necessarily as Mr. Dorsey talked about in the gaming manufacturers. I'm not very supportive of all of us considering the portability as such of a license. And the reason is that there are a lot of bad actors that keep popping up, just like bad pennies. And if such people can continue to just move from one place to another, but not having to go through the investigation process, there will things that will escape us, and that we do not want some individuals in the industry if we are to be the gold standard. So let me clarify a bit better what I mean by that. I'm not sure if there is a mechanism, for instance, and I would suggest if there isn't, perhaps we could put one together, and when we sit together, where the rumor mill, for lack of a better way to describe it, whether it's written, whether it's on social media, on some of individuals who may have track records that are just not easily discoverable. And quite frankly, in my experience, and it's been 28 years doing this in the executive levels. It is surprising and fascinating how we will know, we who are running the major resorts will know a bad actor and will continue to see them move. They don't move necessarily because they left because of cause. Nobody leaves a place and says, oh, I just was a bad dude. Thought I'd get a change of scenery. It's always the usual, whatever it is. So I had a personality conflict or something like that. But the fact is that they do keep popping up. I've seen it all the time. And therefore, I think portability would make us vulnerable. I think it's better that people have to be accountable to the Gaming Control Board and to the commission and frankly to the public that we're supposed to be serving and going through the licensing process. And individuals don't want to do that. And generally, there is a lot of fear initially, and certainly discomfort when you think someone may unravel and make public some of the things that you just do not wish to share. So I had to tell you that I wanted to mention that to everybody, that in my experience, I think if there may be a mechanism right now, Chief Hoffman, where you might say, well, how would we know? Well, I'll tell you who knows. The team members who work in all of these amazing casino resorts, they know. And I'm not suggesting you have paid informants or anything like that. I've watched too many TV shows. What I'm talking about is, do you have in the investigation process, is there a process where investigators actually go into a property and talk to the team members?
Not specifically, but one thing we always try to check is human resources files, personnel files, and go through that and see if there's an issue in there. We don't talk to team members or former team members. It would just greatly broaden the scope of what we do. And we would, if we did do it, we'd want to talk to a whole bunch of them so that we're not just getting one person's opinion. So that, and again, would broaden the scope of what we do. And I think a lot of the discussion has been about trying to narrow down what we do. I will, along these lines though, and I agree with you on the portability issue. And one thing that we are different than other jurisdictions from is that we don't have a renewal process. Once somebody's licensed, if they don't move or go to another property, they're licensed in perpetuity. And so the only way that we revisit somebody and check on them and to keep the bad pennies from being passed around is to not have portability and to do an investigation when somebody moves properties. One thing that I can think of that we could improve though is right now, if you go from an officer to a director of a say a corporation at the same property, or if you go from a director to an officer position, that requires an investigation and a finding of suitability. Now we have the latitude to do a more of a cursory investigation, but the one portability thing I would like to see is that if somebody just changes an officer position, that's administrative. But if they jump from officer to director or director to officer, that becomes an application. And I'd like to see that done administratively, but we have to change. I think we have to change NRS.
Thank you for that information, Chief. I obviously do not have an immediate solution, but I assure you that I will spend as much time as I can to come up with some form of a suggested mechanism that may assist you in that process if you're interested, and maybe would discuss it in a smaller forum, because I do think there's a lot of valuable information that rests with the people who are doing the work all day, every day. I've learned that I believe the legal profession, as in my short time on the commission, is very similar. Excuse me if I speak generally, all the attorneys know each other and know about each other and who came through which school and what, in which case. It's just wonderful. And it reminds me exactly of the casino resort executive levels. We have put myself in that group since 1995. I mean, we're 28 years, we all grew up in the same city. zigzagging different properties, crosswise, sideways, up, down, different locations. Everybody knows what's going on. And a lot of that information rests with the team members who are led by all of us. So I wanted to raise that strictly on the basis of the portability and a question mark that I have, but I will try and think of a way that we could make this easy on Chief and his team, and perhaps there is a mechanism we just haven't thought of yet to uncover some of these issues. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. I'm always very happy to have your input because your experience and your expertise in the gaming industry, and as someone who's actually gone through the process, I've never gone through the process personally, so I don't have your experience with that. So personally, I always welcome your input. I thank you for that. That's why your input is so valuable to the commission, and we thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chief.
Is there any questions from board members for the commissioner about his bringing up a very important point?
Yes, thank you for being here, Commissioner Margatones. Your thoughts were very insightful and I appreciate them. And I too agree with you as it relates to the portability of a license. And as Chief Hoffman noted, sometimes our only opportunity to review licensees is when they are moving properties and coming before the board again. And what I guess I was referring to as far as individual licensees is a bit different in that we have already fully investigated their background up into a certain period of time. And that time frame between their previous license and the one they're coming before the board for again is the time frame that we do our investigations, and we call that an updated investigation. And so that is what I was referring to as being potentially more formalized. But I agree, again, in other jurisdictions, they have term limited license in many circumstances. And so our opportunity to review them to ensure that they're still suitable is when they do apply again at a different property. So I agree that that review is important, but I think that review, because we've already reviewed them in the past, can be shortened to the updated period of time and more formalized. But thank you. I appreciate and agree with you.
Thank you, Doctor.
I'd just like to echo what Chairman Hendrick said, that your perspective is really unique. Top executive running a hotel, so we don't often get that perspective, and it's very valuable. And I, especially on this particular issue, I'd like to have some follow-up on it because I think it's very important. And maybe we can come up with a solution. Okay, it is a problem.
Thank you, Judge.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, Judge.
We've been here about an hour and a half now. By a show of hands, is there anybody else here in the room who's going to want to provide input this morning? All right, seeing none, let's take a 10-minute break. And then what I want to come back is and talk about some of the topics that we've already heard today, and that may spur some further conversation. And then the idea, if the conversation's great, we'll go longer. Otherwise, we'll probably end around noon. But let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break right now. Thank you. All right, let's go back on the record. I'll ask again if there's anybody else who has decided to make any more public comment during the workshop today, either here in Las Vegas or in Carson City. Seeing none, I'll go through a couple of things. One, I want to follow up for Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Reeser. When I talked about my 1-to-1 ratio, I don't take anything that they said as being a complaint without a solution. I see those as being more of a, here's an issue and we need to collaborate on it. And that's exactly what I had envisioned this workshop being. So I look forward to continuing those conversations. Having taken notes here today, as well as some things that I brought with me, I'm going to bring up some topics and would open it up to anybody in the room from the industry, the public, or from here at the Game Control Board to join in this conversation. We talked about wet signatures. We talked about data rooms. I think data rooms and the security they provide and the access they provide, that's certainly the future of not trying to kill trees and certainly not FedExing or UPSing documents around. The less paper we can have, I think that's just going toward the future. So I look forward to those continuing to become the norm and not the outlier. I liked what Mr. Reeser was saying about a considered done kind of timeline checklist. My question to you, Chief, or anybody on your staff is, do we use worksheets now, even if it's Excel? How do we keep track of what is either in, pending, or in progress? How do you keep track of all the paperwork that's due from an applicant?
Well, starting with the application process, Barry and his support, Amy, keep a checklist. They keep close track of.
That's to even start the process. You've got to have all these boxes checked.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How about after those boxes are checked, to Mr. Reeser's point, if something else is asked for, how do we keep track of that?
We get into the request, document request process for the investigation itself, and the agents keep spreadsheets. Should be the document request, but first you have the letter that goes out. When the letter goes out, that's the initial date of request. And you have which documents are requested. You have the date requested, and then a lot of times you have date requested again, and the date requested again. You have date received, and we use that to keep track of everything. And also when we end up with an area of concern about 4040 non-compliance with requests, we use that to support our area of concern.
Is that spreadsheet you're talking about, is that something that's shared with the applicant of here's where we're at, here's what you still need?
What's shared with the applicant is that spreadsheet is used. After a while, another letter gets sent saying, still haven't, this is what's still outstanding. So that spreadsheet is used to produce a letter or an email list saying, hey, still need to give us this stuff.
And to Mr. Reeser's point about timelines, does it say we expect this in 5 days or 10 business days or anything?
Our document request letters always have.
Good, good. Yeah, and I appreciated what you were saying earlier, that a lot of times when people will say, they'll see on an agenda that, this has been a year long, or when the board members, the commission members talk about it, this was submitted a year ago. Why did it take a year to get on? And your comments were very valid in the sense that as the Game Control Board, we can't say why that happened. But what do you tell the applicants when that's happening? How do they or their attorneys know, we told you we needed this in 10 days. We told you we need it again in 10 days. We told you again we need it in 10 days. What do you do next, and how do you advise them? Do you stop the application? Do you?
Yeah. We do after a while, and we try really hard to get cooperation. We don't want to waste time, and we want things to move forward. But you reach a certain point, and we go, all right. We're not going to work on your application anymore until you get us what we need. And so don't expect to get on an agenda until you cooperate.
Yeah. So they're advised of that fact. We need to move on to those in the hopper that are trying to cooperate, and we're not getting to them because
Yeah.
we can't get anything done.
Yeah, we'll tell them, you know what, we've got applicants who are cooperating. We're gonna move them up line, and we're gonna put your application on hold until you figure out what you want to do or figure out whether you want to cooperate or not.
Yeah. And you mentioned that we've got 2 people in applicant services. That's
Correct.
for the entire state.
We have, that's for the entire state. We have Barry Chilton, our applicant services coordinator, and we have Agent Amy Morton. We upgraded that position from staff to agent because she's doing a lot of highly complex legal stuff along with Barry. But we also have Diane Preston's office also handles applications as well. So we basically have 3 people, but 2.5.
I'm going to save part of the staff conversation to later, but let me ask this now before I forget it. How many people should that take?
I think we're good.
You can actually keep up with everything.
Yeah,
with 2 people.
There was a while back, we had a backlog, but we've had some staffing changes. Barry can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to misspeak about his staffing needs, but I think we're in good shape as far as applicant services go. Barry, are we?
Yeah. Yes, this is Barry Chilton. I'm the coordinator of applicant services. And as far as the staff goes, we also utilize the investigative admin staff to help us out. So Amy and I, we do the intake, we review the apps, we work with the applicants to bring those apps into compliance. We process the application fees, we set up all the accounts and put all that into the system. However, we utilize admin staff to do all the scanning, filing, and those types of things. So it sounds like there's just 2 of us doing all that, but in reality, there's about 4 or 5 of us that really do all of the processing when it comes to the paperwork and things like that. But the hard work, the dealing with the public, coming up with application fees, citing regs and statutes and things, that's just Amy and I. And then Diane Preston, she in Las Vegas does all of the registration. So for service providers, independent hosts, independent agents, associated equipment, that has really helped my office a lot because we used to do about 600 applications a year when we had that. Now we're down to about 400, a little over 400 applications. And Diane has some unique challenges too, wherein her approvals are limited. So within so many years, they all have to renew. That was causing a big backlog with my office when we were during COVID, because all that came at the same time. We were working from home and we had multiple applications that were coming due. So by having that moved out of applicant services, the registration part, it's really helped us out. And it's helped me to give more of my time to the public, to be able to have phone calls with attorneys, with people under Reg 9 issues and things like that. So it's really worked out. So it sounds like we only have a few staff. Applicant services is technically me and my assistant, Amy Morton. However, we also utilize the admin staff in Carson City to help move everything along.
Good, thank you. And Ms. Preston, when we get to the staffing question here in a minute, I'm going to ask you about what Mr. Chilton just said about how much he's moved over to you and whether or not that works. But I want to keep moving here on a couple of quicker items. Closing conferences, Mr. Reeser said how important he felt from them as being counsel from an applicant standpoint. Sounded like those are back post-COVID, something we do.
Didn't realize they went away.
No.
We should always be doing closing
Good.
conference. I completely agree with Dan on that.
Good.
And I'm hoping that we are doing that. We
Good.
should always have a closing conference.
Great. Let me get into something that Mr. Reeser stole a bit of my thunder on. I've been thinking long and hard about expedited services. And I know, Chief, you and I have discussed this briefly in the last couple of days. And there's going to be pros and cons to this, but I will throw this out to the industry as just a thought at this point. But I'm interested in having the discussion that Mr. Reeser talked about in terms of short forms for restricted locations with the same ownership, something that can go very fast. Don't believe it can be administratively approved at this point because it's just not drafted that way. But I would be willing to grit together with a group of industry and agents here at the board and talk about, could we do a 60-day application, a 90-day application? And when I mean 60 to 90 days, I'm talking about from the time it's filed to the time it gets heard by the commission. So super fast.
One thing to think about, you may have same licensee or somebody licensed at another place, and they go to they say a second location or a third location. Can't forget about the landlords, the difference in the landlords. And I think that's what's holding up some of these applications. It's capturing the background on the landlord, background check on the landlord, and the form that the landlord has to fill out.
Would it be moving just responsibility from one side of the table to the other side of the table if the board were to recommend conditions that said you're approved if your landlord application comes through, or would that gum up the system?
I think it would gum up the system.
Yeah. We find out a bad actor on the back end, and then we try to unravel after they're open.
Anytime you give an approval before everything comes in, you're going to lose a lot of leverage getting.
Right. Yeah. All right. So we'll continue to think about that one. See if there's a way to speed things up for people who are already in the system, fully licensed. It's just a new location, or certainly, as Mr. Reeser talked about, SROs at a restricted location. I gotta believe those are moving fast already. They just don't take very long.
Faster. You'll see a handful of them on every agenda. Those are being fast tracked as best we can.
They usually end up on the board's consent agenda and the commission's consent agenda. That is probably more of a function of open meeting law and scheduling. You guys approve it, but it can't make an agenda till next month. So we've added 45 to 60 days right there.
Right. I was thinking about batching where you have SRO applications, say for one company operating at these different locations, but then you still get hung up on the landlord. The variability is in the landlord and layout of the property. And just on yesterday's agenda, even though you have a route operator, you have problems with the site, proximity to a church or proximity to a school. So you really do still have to look at stuff. Even though the operator is a known entity, it's becomes the variability is in the location, landlord and actual physical property.
Yeah, let's keep that on a to-do list, maybe just internally of can we look faster at the landlord situation? Can we speed up the idea of the suitability? I don't know if it can, because to your point, you got to do the investigation. You got to look at the site fee. You got to have the diagrams. There's a lot to do, but seems to me that we're moving fast right now. But if there's an ability to move faster, we should, take time to dig into it. The next item I had on my list, and this might be controversial, but I mentioned at a tech workshop that I'm looking for radical changes. By radical, I didn't mean bad. I didn't mean crazy. What I mean is non-traditional. That's a better word than radical, but I'm looking to speed things up. And one thing I'm looking at is there's a lot of government agencies that do expedited processing. Secretary of State does that. You pay an extra fee. Public Works does that. You pay an extra fee. The U.S. Postal Service does that. And you pay an extra fee. I'm interested in, I don't know if we have the staffing again. Don't know if we can do this, but I'm interested if there could be a way, what I'm calling a toll road, that says, this shouldn't be controversial, and I, as the applicant, am willing to pay for expedited service, but I need this done so I can get on with my business in 60 days, 90 days from the time I file it. And we would have to figure out staffing needs and could we do this without slowing down the others. I wouldn't want to speed up some applications at the expense of the regular road. You got your highway, you got your toll road, but I definitely want to get together with a working group of the industry and see if that's even feasible. It's going to cost more money because it's going to take us more time and money, kind of as we talked about the technology division workshop. If we move some people over to expediting things, there's going to be a fee to it. So I'm just putting that out to the industry right now of, is that something interesting? And then we'll have to look at the logistics, whether it could even be done.
You mentioned pros and cons. on
Yes,
this,
yeah.
And you've heard some cons.
Yes.
And I can state it.
Please.
We already do triage. We already try and accommodate applications when there's a sense of urgency. We're always trying to get everything done as quickly as we can. And we do prioritize, say, a new property opening. We're trying not to hang up the economy. I can't see how we can sidetrack agents onto fast track applications without harming everybody else that's waiting to be done. And I also, I don't want to treat an applicant who has less financial resources than one that has greater financial resources. Next thing you know, you're going to have an agenda gummed up with the wealthier operators at the expense of smaller operators. And I am proud of the fact that we don't do that. And again, the difference between us and Secretary of State or a construction approval office, these are privileged licenses, and I think there's a distinction. I want to treat everybody equal while still taking into account their needs as far as time. And yeah, if you want to fast track and you don't add staff, then there's gonna be, if people are paying for money, there's gonna be an expectation of agents working overtime. And sure, my agents could make more money with overtime, but they're not gonna make as much as a job. They're gonna work 60 to 80 hours a week and earn some overtime. They're gonna say they might as well go over to the industry and make twice as much money. And they're not working just for the money. They're working because they care about what they're doing. And they're also working for quality of life. They don't want to work 80 hours a week. So I can't see that happening without adding staff. And my other concerns would still be valid in that I don't want to treat differently based on finances.
Yeah, very valid concerns, and I appreciate that, Chief, and appreciate your candor. I absolutely agree that you wouldn't want to do this to the detriment of the people who are filing applications in the normal process. So you may be right. It may require legislative approval for more staffing. It may require that we go to legislature and say, could you create a fast track team, which would be a whole new system of investigative agency division. Yeah.
You're still going to have your problem there may not be staff, but it's going to be bandwidth on your agenda. How much time of an agenda do you want to dedicate to fast track applications versus regular applications? There's only so many hours that you want to have a meeting, a board and a commission can go, and there's only so many binders of reports you.
Yeah, but I would think in my mind, the fast track should be, there shouldn't be a lot of issues. If there are issues, they're not going to be fast tracked. And I personally remember the days of the 2-day board meetings. We're finishing our board meetings now around mid-afternoon. If they go any longer, to me, I would be talking to my other board members about, let's, spend a half day on Wednesday, half day on Thursday. Your point is valid, though. For the commission, it would make their day very long, and they're already going all day long.
Their days are long.
Yeah, they got a long day. Yeah. So, yeah, I wonder if can we compress that time frame? So let's keep that on the discussion item. And again, Maybe it's something we got to talk to the industry about and see if there's a solution, if there's even an interest in it, and then it could require legislative change before we could even pull that off. But I wanted to put that out there. That was the main ones on my list. Mr. Reeser had, as I noted, more than 10. Did he leave us? Yeah, his number 10 and my number 10 didn't match up, but he's got a lot of really good points that we'll have to dig into deeper. My thought process was is we take what we've heard here today, internally and externally, and then just create a to-do list, which is will this require statute? Will this require regulation? Would this require just some administrative approval? Is it just a policy change? Is it just something internally that the investigative division can do? So that's something probably I will ask our senior policy counsel to take on as a project. Is we'll get together and we'll talk about all the items brought up today, and then we'll look at a to-do list. And Mr. Dorsey's comment is very valid that this isn't the end of the conversation. We will continue. If anybody wants to submit public comment, submit anything to our office as ideas that maybe they're watching virtually and they didn't have the opportunity to submit, you're certainly welcome to do that. I'm at a stage on my list here that I want to hear from the other board members or from anybody else in the public if there's anything you want to talk about what we've brought up today.
I have some
Please.
on
Yeah.
Dan's comments.
Good. And I know you want to still talk about staffing, so we'll do that. And you said you had some closing comments, but yeah, let's talk about Dan's comments. Sure.
Yeah, he mentioned agents stating a tentative agenda date when they start their the investigation. I actually discourage that because everybody forgets the tentative.
Yeah.
And they think it's a promise, and you really don't know how long an investigation is going to take. And even though you have a complete application in front of you, you don't know how long an application is going to take until you dig in and you either find issues, or you get non-cooperation, or you discover non-disclosed assets. Happens a lot. So my policy is when we get closer to completing an investigation and wrapping it up and getting the report created or starting to finalize the report, that's when we firm up an agenda date, and that's when people can make travel plans and things like that. Now, yes, sometimes that's troublesome, as say you have a applicant from a foreign country and they need to book flights way ahead of time. We try and give them as much warning as we can, but still want to maintain flexibility there. And again, people often forget the word tentative.
Yeah, that early question, I get these myself. People will say, if I was going to file an application, when do you think it'd be on an agenda? And I say, I don't have any background in that. You've got to call applicant services.
I get those calls a lot, and I always say, no, I have guidelines where, is it an individual with simple background versus simple and finances versus complex. I can give them a ballpark idea how long it's going to take. And I also get calls just like yesterday, Truckee Gaming, they had a drop dead date on getting a deal consummate. And I got a call a long time ago from the attorney saying, if we go forward with this, can we get this on, done within, say, a year or so? And I said, oh yeah, we'll do that. Or a new property opening like Durango. If we are expecting an opening date of X, are we okay? And I go, yeah, just give us everything we need. But and these discussions happen far enough ahead of time. But yeah, we give estimates. We don't give promises.
Good. Yeah, good. It's impossible if you don't have all the information. How could
you? Just don't know.
Yeah, you don't know.
Just don't know. And every application is different. There's so much variability that you can't promise it. You can do your best, or in an emergency situation, you can say, yeah, we'll get that on. We're going to keep these people employed.
Good.
Let's see, what else do I have on Dan's?
he wants council to always be copied, and our policy is to always copy council on document requests. But some applicants want to save money and they don't want to pay attorney's fees. So they'll say, don't copy my attorney anymore because I don't want to pay him anymore. So, we kind of, it's driven by the applicant and not the attorney. The applicant's the one who's responsible. We try and accommodate their requests. But applicants out there or potential applicants out there, yeah, let us copy council.
Yeah, or if they do say what you just said they request, I would say you need to send a letter to us that copies them and
Put it in
says that.
writing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
From here forth, you don't need to copy my
Yes,
counsel.
and when they change attorneys,
Right.
sometimes happens, we want that in writing too.
Good.
Sometimes we've had an attorney working for another party to a deal come in and start acting like they're the attorney for the applicant. We're like, okay, you better get, we contact the applicant, say, we need something in writing saying we changed attorneys.
Right.
And every once in a while they go, no, we didn't.
Wow.
Let's see, we talked about landlord issue. Not touching on all of Dan's notes, some of them require digestion. He did mention Reg 9, and we've been doing a lot of work to improve Reg 9. And Barry's been spearheading that. Barry, do you want to talk about the changes that we're making to Reg 9?
Yes, so as part of the legislative change to that, we've been working with the AG's office to come up with new language for the administrative process for temporary licensure. So I just reached out again to the Attorney General's office this week because I had some concerns with time frames. Because what I've found is to be problematic right now is families aren't getting death certificates quickly. And so we have a 30-day time limit in the reg that says you have to file for temporary licensure. Well, we have to have a death certificate. We also have to have a court order naming a representative of the estate, which I think that was part of the conversation that Dan brought up with the probate attorneys and probate court. That's not a quick process. So I've reached out to the Attorney General's office to change the language further to allow for us not to require certain individuals to file within that 30 days. Maybe we extend the window to 90 days, or even have a carve out for some folks. If you have a husband and wife, they're both licensed, and they don't need continuing operations. One of them, the surviving spouse, only needs temporary licensure to dispose of the shares. Why are we requiring them to get temporary licensure now? They should be able to file after they've gone through probate court or settled the estate, then they can come back to us and file for temporary licensure to then dispose of those interests. So these are things that we're working on right now with the Attorney General's office to get changed, to streamline the process, to reduce the financial burden on a family when this occurs. And we're just waiting for new language to come out and then for us to have a workshop on it. So that's in the process. One other thing that I know we haven't really talked about yet, but Dan brought up, was forms, and he was talking about on a Form 20 certain things that we require. I'm going to let the public know right now, you should always go to our website and use current forms that are on the website. Don't download forms and keep them for 6 months or a year, because we're constantly working. I get calls a lot from slot route operators that ask questions about forms. Is this still necessary? We are working with our applicants. We're also working with the restricted team and other teams within the board to go ahead and get rid of things that we don't need. So we recently updated some forms. We're right now discussing updating the application forms 2 and 1, and we're making changes to those. So what I'm saying is, and I say this to everyone, don't save forms on your computer and refile those. Every time you file a new application, go to our website and get latest forms, because we're constantly updating them and making changes to help streamline the process. And we're actively working to try to get rid of things that the investigative team no longer needs or is required to have. Some of the things with restricted, however, those are imposed through regulation and we can't get rid of them. So in order to remove some of the restrictions that are in the forms for restricted, we would have to have a workshop, go back and look at like a diagram is required. There's other things that are required by regulation. And so that's why some of those are necessary and we get complaints a lot that they're cumbersome. However, those are in regulation. And so we're required to keep those in.
Good. Thank you. And I'm glad to hear that you're working on Reg 9 and the probate issues that we got approval from the legislature on to streamline that process. For those of you who don't know, we were able to get the legislature to say that if a licensee passed away, we should have the chair's approval for temporary approval during a transition period so that there's not an unlicensed entity. What was happening is it was a very bad situation of you're dealing with the death of a loved one, a family member. At the same time, the game control board is saying to you, you've missed deadlines. You're subject to potential discipline for not getting these things filed in a timely manner. And then they'd have to come up in a public meeting and apologize. At the same time, they're grieving. So we're trying to streamline that. I'm glad to see that you're working with the Attorney General's office. I would encourage us to be sure the probate bar is either at a workshop or you send them copies of what we're looking at so that they can give their input as well. What else do you got, Chief?
Yeah, Barry mentioned forms and Dan mentioned forms, Forms 7 and 7A. Actually, right now, if the form is 1 year stale, we have them, if somebody has done a 7 or a 7A, well, mostly 7, that's the personal history questionnaire. We require a new one after, it's policy. We require a new one after a year, but I would entertain stretching it out to 2 years. Dan was thinking 2 years already, but I would be reluctant to have it stretch out to 3 because people's finances change a lot. Can change a lot over 3 years. Now, what people can do is keep digital. This might go against what Barry's advising. Digital version of their Form 7, and they can go through it and update the parts, but they should double check the website to make sure the form hasn't completely changed. Well, it has not completely changed.
Yeah, do we put up like a red line version or an updated version? So let's say I'm using the 2021 form and it's 2023. It seems like it'd be good from an applicant side to say, oh, this is what's changed. And I can see real quick, it was number 13. It was number 28.
I don't think we do that.
Good. That'd be something that would be helpful for somebody to say,
yeah, in the form list, we could have a red line version
Yeah.
when we make changes.
right, this is the 23 form and here's how it's changed since the last one. And then to your point, if they saved it, they'd say, oh, I get it. I got to update these 3 things. Yeah.
That's a possibility.
Great.
The other, Dan mentioned Form 6, which is the pre-opening cash form for a new property. And that maybe we shouldn't need it when there's an existing property, but you change operators. But one of the main purposes of Form 6 is bankroll, and the bankroll is going to be different for every operator. So we want to capture that. We want to help out tax and license with that. So I would disagree with not requiring it for an existing property that's being acquired by a new operator. What we are doing, another thing we do on a new operator is we do comparison of projections with other properties and with the historic. And we're going more towards just a comparison with the historic performance of the property versus laying out a bunch of other new properties. Now, if it's a new build, then you definitely have to go out to other similar properties for your projection comparisons. So we've already tried to stream that a little bit. But going down my list, 4080, I think the reg says 6 months. You know, your approval expires after 6 months unless you request a waiver of 4080. But what the board can do, and I think it might have done in some cases, once the waiver is approved, there's flexibility on how long that waiver can last, which can alleviate some of the burden on the licensees. You know, for a while there, it was every 6 months, but I think it can be stretched out to as long a time period as the board is comfortable with.
Yeah, let's definitely put that on our list of things to look at.
Yeah, that's something you can do right away.
Yeah.
Just a policy. 8020, for a while there, I was thinking, well, yeah, it's transfer of interest among known licensees. Why can't we just do it administratively and notify tax and license change in the ownership percentages? But right around that time, I was thinking I had made up my mind on it. We started getting a whole bunch of violations of 8020 where licensees were doing it, and then later on finding out they needed to request permission to do it. And along with the 8020 violation, we were getting a lot of 8050 violation, which is they're consummating the deal, the transfer of interest, in violation of Reg 8050 as well. And the only way we're capturing that is by doing that investigation of the transfer of interest. Given the problems that have arisen, I've backed off on thinking about 8020 as an administrative matter and continue to have it as an application that needs to be filed and dealt with.
Yeah,
Through an investigation.
personally, I definitely want to look at that Reg 8, 8020, 8030. There's one of them that in black and white is just not how policy is done.
Well, yeah, that reminds me, I am working with the Attorney General's office, merging 8020 and 8030 through language changes in the language to make the reg, to make it clearer.
Yeah, that one's an interesting one that I think I mentioned on the record before. Former Chairman Bill Bible tried to get me caught on the record as a deputy AG to say, well, this is what it says in black and white, so that's what it means, right? And that's just not what it's supposed to be. So if the Attorney General's office has to be opining on what something means, that's not very good for the general public to be able to read it and understand it.
Right. Yeah, we're actually working on that.
Good.
Let's see what else. I know. Can't remember whether it was Mr. Darcy or Dan that brought up, can we abbreviate our investigations if somebody has been through the system, depending on how long ago they've been through the system? And the answer is yes, we do. It's policy and the general guidelines. I came up with a memo about it, I don't know, 15 years ago, a long time ago. What we do is if somebody has been through the system 2 years or less ago and they're reapplying for something else, we do mainly just a background check, not even in the field, unless it's local. Like if an agent's based in Carson, they might go check the courts. But a lot of it's internet databases.
Good. Is that something then, if Mr. Reeser isn't aware of, is that something we just need to publicize better?
Well, I'll continue and talk about whether to publicize it or not. 2 years to 5 years, we do what we call a net worth roll forward, where we're looking at their latest brokerage statement, their bank statement, if there's a change in real estate. So we see the change in assets and liabilities, but we don't do a full cash flow analysis unless we come across a problem, like something doesn't look right. And then 5 years or more, we do a full cash flow analysis. And all this on background, we pick up where we left off. But if it's 5 years or more and they've moved to another jurisdiction, we're gonna go check it out. And the reason I interrupted you was this is all discretionary, and there's a lot of latitude. Like if somebody is a little more than 2 years and we haven't had any problems with them and they have a reputation as a good operator, we'll go, okay, it's been less than 5 and more than 2, and we may end up not doing as much as we would do otherwise. Or say somebody's 5.5 years out there. Are we going to drive them through the cash flow analysis pothole if they're a known entity and we haven't had any problems? But I like to keep the latitude, and so I don't want to get pinned down into something that's, even if we put it out as saying this is a guideline and there's discretion here. Again, it's like that tentative agenda. Everyone forgets the discretionary part and they go, well, hey, you can't do this because it says right here. So
Understood.
I'm trying to preserve that.
Yeah, understood. I want to save 10 minutes or so to talk about staffing. We don't have a hard stop at noon, but that was kind of what I was shooting for. Did you have other things that you feel we have to talk about today?
I've covered my notes, and on staffing, DC Allen talked a lot about staffing yesterday, and so
Right.
I would actually incorporate his discussion by reference on that. If we want to save some time.
Yeah, let me ask Ms. Presson, why don't you step up, following what Mr. Chilton talked about, that all the registrations have moved down to your crew. Do you believe that you have enough bandwidth and staffing capabilities to keep up with everything? Are you running at 110% capacity, or are you able to keep up?
Up until Diane Presson, Investigative Services Manager, up until July or June of this year, I was fully staffed, but I've lost 2 people this year myself. So right now I'm running the team with myself, 2 agents, and an admin staff. We've been okay. The summer was kind of slow for us. However, where we have an issue is when it's independent agent renewal time, which is coming up at the end of next year, first part of 25. At that time, we usually have over 100 independent agent renewals alone. All of our registration programs are on a 5-year renewal cycle. So we are always doing renewals on top of the new applications that we get. And as you know, I talked about yesterday, we're also taking on hosting centers. Fortunately, there's not a lot of players in that place, so I don't see that it's going to put a burden on us. I have elected to reduce my staff right now because we were able to help out non-restricted because of the people that they've lost, but they know that I'm going to be looking for a person or 2 coming up, within the year or so. But so far we're doing okay. I have a great staff and they work really hard. Fortunately, our investigations are pared down. That's why they're a registration. The board commission have found areas where the regulatory risk is lower. So we don't do as much of an investigation on them. And so our process is a little faster. We usually get a renewal or a new registration completed within 4 to 6 weeks. Our biggest wait time has to do with getting the fingerprint results back. And then also applicants' responsiveness. And with the service providers and the hosting centers coming up, the cloud computing ones, we work that in conjunction with the technology division because they also have an approval piece for that. So
good, thank you for that. And I want to echo your comments that your staff is very, very capable and do a lot of yeoman's work and a great deal of paperwork. And that goes for everybody at the Gaming Control Board. I've said this publicly many times that all of the employees here at the board are here because they believe that they can make a difference and do something good for the state of Nevada. Nobody is here because they thought they wanted to get rich. So you have to believe in what you're doing and believe that you're making a difference for your state and feel good about what you're providing in terms of services. So thank you, and thank all your staff. And Chief, I know you mentioned that earlier, that picking up overtime might be nice on the short term, but that's not why people chose to take any state job, much less work at the Gaming Control Board. It's a quality of life decision. If they wanted to work 100 hours a week, then they would go in the private industry, which is fine to them, but that's a different quality of life. So thank you for that. I do want to touch on as well, when we're talking about staffing, and Chief, we've talked about this before, we may need to go back to the legislature and talk about the fact, and you can tell me how long ago it was, but a number of years ago, they made the Game Control Board budget not be self-funded, which is an interesting concept, but determine that we have to cover about, is it 30% approximately of our annual budget from investigative fees?
I don't know the percentage. I know it's a large dollar amount. I want to say.
Yeah, so we're in that ballpark, 30%-ish.
And, I think during the recession, while having staff, losing staff and not being able to fill positions, I think they raised it up by about $4 million.
I-
Squeeze that golden egg out.
At the last budgetary meetings in front of the legislature, I explained to them, without going into detail, that that's an unsustainable business model. If we do everything right, we make less money, and yet they're requiring the Game Control Board to fund a third-ish of its budget. That's very different from being self-funded. There's other state agencies that are self-funded, and then you can decide, you can make decisions about staffing, you can make decisions about buying equipment, you can make decisions about updating your computer system.
Or even decisions about how much investigative fees should be.
Fees, yeah, which I know Mr. Reeser stuck his neck out a little bit, but I do believe, and I have this on my list as well, that it probably is time to look at the cost of investigative fees. Not because we're trying to generate a profit over here, but we can't be running a deficit either, because the legislature requires that the Gaming Control Board, as I said, present every year a certain percentage of our own budget. And then on top of it, along with every other state agency, we have to justify every single expense we have. I think the craziest one I heard in the last week or so was our out-of-state travel budget is only a couple $1,000s. And so we have agents who have to go out audit up in the very northern tip of the state. We don't have enough money for them to stay at Nevada hotels because the state doesn't allow you to have more than 100% of what they believe the state rate is. Well, the state rate apparently in Wendover is more than 200% of that. So we would ask them, well, could our agents stay in Utah? Not unless apparently you got to go to the Board of Examiners and get approval for that, because we don't have out-of-state travel budget. And these are all things that it's not just the Gaming Control Board, that's just government in general. But that's insane. I mean, that we can't go out and do an audit because we can't have hotel rooms doesn't make any sense. So that's a justification for being self-funded. We can make intelligent decisions, but that's a conversation for the legislature that we will continue to have. Anything else? You said you had some closing comments, Chief. Would you like to make those now?
I was, yes, Chair. I was going to conclude just with a couple of notes why it didn't come up as much today as I thought it would, but there's a lot of comparison between us and other jurisdictions. And I have a couple notes about why we're different than other jurisdictions. Probably the complaint about us, bringing up a complaint that I thought was going to come up, is that we cost more and we take more time than a lot of other jurisdictions. And the reason is we do more. And the things that we do that a lot of other jurisdictions don't do, one of them is cash flow analysis. And the other is in-person checks where we go to the jurisdictions and check in person with law enforcement and regulatory agencies and records. And I've got some examples of why we do this. Cash flow analysis, an example by story. We had a real estate developer from a large, from LA, and he had applied to buy 3 properties. And he had no arrest history. He appeared clean. He had an LLC for every property he owned in LA, probably about 30 of them. And my supervisor at the time said, "Oh, this is going to be a slam dunk. This guy's, this will be easy. You should get it done quickly." Well, we started looking into the cash flow. We started looking into the source of funds for the 3 casinos. And the money was not coming just from a loan from a financial institution. It was coming from his some of the LLCs that he used to own the properties, or his properties in LA. And we looked at the books and checking accounts for those LLCs, and we saw, well, there's money coming from another LLC here. And what he had done was he had moved money through 5 layers of LLCs, and the money matched up right to what the purchase price of the properties was. And we traced the money further back, and the money was coming from this guy, we'll call him Mr. X. And we took the information we had on Mr. X. We didn't know much about him. And we went to our contacts at LAPD, who we had developed a good relationship with by going there in person and developing that relationship. And they're like, "Oh yeah, Mr. X, we're working with DEA and FBI and state police about Mr. X and his friends." Turned out that they were a group of Israeli organized crime ecstasy. And they wanted these casinos basically to use as a laundromat for their ecstasy profits. Now, I think if it were a different jurisdiction, they didn't do that cash flow analysis, those casinos would be, they'd be laundromats for drug money. So that's one example why we do that. And I touched on the in-person, our relationship with LAPD, and we have relationships all over the world. We have another relationship. One is we had a father and son come want to buy a casino in Nevada, and their financing looked okay. We checked that out, of course. But they were from New Jersey. We did background in New Jersey, and they were okay. But they had also operated a casino in an Eastern European country and lived there. So we went to that Eastern European country and met with the embassy and with their national investigator, who put us in touch with law enforcement in that Eastern European country. And we found out that the casino that they were running was owned by the Russian mafia. And so needless to say, they didn't get a license. So again, the cash flow analysis, I feel it's very important, and the in-person checks are very important. And those are just 2 examples. So, and then comparing us to other jurisdictions, I'll throw it out there that if another jurisdiction isn't charging very much, you as licensees are probably being ripped off, because they're probably going to take 20 or 30 grand, and they're only going to do teletype check, teletype background check, warrants, arrest history maybe, And then the other thing they're going to do is check with us. Diane mentioned yesterday, over 2,000 inquiries
Every year.
this year to date, and we're not done with the year yet. So we may charge more, but I guarantee you, anybody that's been through a Nevada investigation knows they're getting their money's worth. They know that they've been investigated, and that sets us apart also.
Let me ask you a quick question. How long do you think you spend on the average inquiry from another jurisdiction who's asking us to do their homework for them?
Diane, what do you think?
So we help them out in two ways. In most cases, we have a portal on our website where law enforcement and regulatory agencies can submit for a license verification. And that's just an email process. We look them up in our system and we'll let them know that they're licensed, or if they were a game employee here. And we will let them know if there's any we usually say no derogatory information in most cases. The other way is sometimes they want to come and see agents that have worked on a case. They want to talk to them, or they may want to come and review our investigative report. That takes a little bit longer because that's a little back and forth for me. Usually, but I would say all told, it's going to be a total of maybe 2 days of work for me, and then also getting the information from records and research. It gets loaded on a laptop, and that's done by IT, and IT brings them up for me to provide them the information.
So out of that 2,000, how many of those are the second one you mentioned?
That over 2,000, that's just the license verification portal request that we
portal.
get.
How many of the ones where other jurisdictions show up and takes you 2 days to deal with them?
I believe I've got notes over there that
That's okay. Just
we had like maybe 10 or 12 this year. Prior to the pandemic, I had a lot more.
So a month of your time, and I assume we're not charging anything for that?
No,
And I assume the Nevada legislature is not giving us any money for that?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, the license verification portal was my CPM project. Prior to that, we did everything by fax. And so the paper that we were using, they faxed us in their requests. We faxed back their response. It was somebody's 40-hour-a-week job to provide that information. Through my CPM project. We've been able to layer it down to we were at like 5 hours, but with the proliferation of gaming everywhere, and a lot of people have started in Nevada, it's probably more of like a 10-hour-a-week job. But I do have my assistant does most of that, and she's very good at it.
Yeah.
Adding on to Diane, to the time, when Diane processes a visit by another jurisdiction, it can tie up about a day of my agent's time to answer questions and to go through, and have them sit down and go through the report and things like that.
Yeah, and certainly we're all very happy to be what's been identified as the gold standard in the world of gaming. But I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, the legislature is not giving us any money for that. So we can't be shortchanging the citizens of the state of Nevada, the taxpayers of Nevada. We want to be good regulators and regulator neighbors to everybody else in the world. But as you mentioned, Ms. Bresson, if the proliferation of gaming is asking us to be their educator, is asking us to do their homework, we're going to have to figure out some way that they have to pay for that. If you're talking about 10 hours a week, that's the state of Nevada's taxpayers paying for some other jurisdiction to get the answers that they're either not doing themselves or not charging those applicants. So let's continue to have that conversation and figure out how we can have some of those costs pass through.
One positive thing about helping out other jurisdictions besides goodwill, the way I look at it is the cleaner the gambling industry, the better its reputation worldwide is good for Nevada, in that the more people that participate in it, the more people feel that it's clean. the more of them are gonna come here to Nevada and gamble.
Absolutely, Chief. I would also say that the cooperation should be a two-way street. When we need something from them, they know that we're here to cooperate with them. And if that balance is 50-50, we're great. If that balance is way leaning toward them to ask us for information that they don't have the expertise, the resources, or the money to do, then we've got to figure out some way that they can compensate the taxpayers of Nevada. Yeah, good.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Bresson. Anything else you'd like to add today, Chief?
No, sir, I think that covers all of my notes.
Well, great. First of all, I want to thank you, Chief, for everything you did. Deputy Chief Rippety, Deputy Chief Allen, Ms. Presson, Mr. Chilton, Deputy Chief Teggio, and all of your staff. Please thank them. As we mentioned at the board meeting yesterday, what all of you do in investigations helps the members of the Game Control Board as we get ready for the meetings. There's a lot for us to digest, and it's a lot easier when you've all gone through it for months, if not a year, to make it condensed down for us to ask the proper questions to you, and then on the public record to the applicants. I will also thank everybody here today who've sat through with us for 2 hours and 45 minutes. Everybody watching virtually, thank you very much. If there's anybody else who wants to add anything, you can do so now, or you can do so during public comment, which I will open up now. Our second public comment section is placed on the agenda to give the public an opportunity to comment on gaming-related matters. Anyone wishing to address the board may do so at this time. Comments by each person are limited to 3 minutes as a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. If board members ask questions of the speaker, the time period needed for your 3 minutes will not be taken away from you while we ask those questions. If speakers have any handouts, please give them to the enforcement agents here in the room or in Carson City. And also pursuant to the open meeting law, the board may not act upon any matters brought up during public comment. However, we welcome the public as well as fellow board members' comments during this section. I'll first go to Carson City. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to make public comment today? Seeing none, we'll go here to Las Vegas. Please introduce yourself for the record. We don't have a transcriber, so go ahead and spell your name just so we have it on the audio and video recording.
Sure. Zachary Poppel, Zachary Poppel, one of the research directors at the Culinary Union. And just thank you so much. It's really been very informative. And just 3 quick comments based on things that were said here. The first one, Member Assad, you brought up the recent hack, and just like the devastating effect that it's had, many properties, front to back, top to bottom. I think is really important. So the sort of 3 ideas we have are sort of like about improving the investigative process. And I don't know if there's a way in that process to have dialogue about cybersecurity, because and this probably is for the corporate securities division of the investigative process, but just what you'll have is potentially publicly traded applicants who will say they have many types of cybersecurity technology at their disposal. Like the new T900 is the way to prevent the next hack, but they might not necessarily fully know how to deploy it. So just having some kind of way to kind of test their cybersecurity as they're coming into Nevada, I think that from workers' perspective would be, because the hack is really devastating for a lot of people, really valuable. So thank you for bringing that up. The second point was the commissioner brought up this idea of, I believe, like an application trigger event that would sort of bring up someone again for suitability review, and whether that in that process there would be some investigation of HR records, or having that ability to talk to team members. I think from a worker's perspective, they would be supportive of that. So having that as like a dialogue about what that process would look like, I think is really positive and productive. And just the nature of HR records is that they don't really fully capture all the events that take place. So just finding some way to get a sort of broader, deeper analysis of what someone's history at a certain place is really, really important. And last thing I'll say is and fully endorse and support the cash flow analysis as someone who does that as well. That's really important, and pursuit of additional funding to back that up is really important. And this board and this body have a really amazing reputation, and And just so the last thing I'll say is like defending that reputation is really important. There's at least one publicly traded company that kind of misrepresents the application process and investigation process as an obstacle to diversity on their board. And I think if there's a publicly traded company in public filings that's going to misrepresent the investigative process, that's really important to Nevadans, and that misrepresentation should be addressed as a way to kind of defend the integrity of the process. So again, just thank you so much for having this space and for this workshop, and appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? Board members, anything you'd like to add?
Nothing additional, no additional questions, but I just wanted to thank everyone for being here and thank Chief Hoffman and his team. Really appreciated all of the time and effort that you all put into this and all of the thought, and Mr. Reeser and Mr. Dorsey for your comments. Thank you.
Judge? Yes, thank you. Also echo those comments by Dr. Watkins and the chair, and to thank Chief Hoffman, DC Rippey, DC Allen, Ms. Preston, your staff. You guys do an outstanding job. With regard to, I believe I got this right, that the legislature requires us to self-fund about 20 to 25% of our budget.
Yeah,
Somewhere in there?
It's a dollar amount, correct? More than a percentage.
Correct. Yeah,
What would you say was 20 million or something?
that's what I have on the top of my head, but I can't key that's the amount.
And our budget is
50 million?
roughly
55
50 million, 55 million.
DC Riggle probably would have the
He does.
exact figure for you.
So that being said, though, my opinion is why not self-fund completely? I'd like to be autonomous from the legislature, completely self-fund. We operate within our budget and our expenses, and then everything else would go to the general fund. We're the most important agency in the state. I think we should be exclusive in that regard. Just something to think about moving forward. And the other thing, I think there are just way too many regulations. I think that would speed up the process of the applications and the entire procedure that applicants have to go through, that we have to go through, if we would just eliminate more regulations. Some of the regs I've gone through and I've seen, they go on for like a page and a half, 2 pages, and it just, you get lost in there. And I'm constantly asking myself, what's the rationale for this reg? What is the reason for this reg? And I scratch my head and I can't come up with an answer. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done there. I'd like to thank the chair for starting that process of going through the regulations and trying to eliminate those that are outdated, unnecessary, redundant, or really have no rational basis in reasonable thought. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And for myself on the public funding comments, I agree that we need further conversations with the governor's office and with the legislature. I just don't believe that it's a sustainable model for us to have 20, 30% of our budget have to be covered by something that happened several years ago. Things happened where the state needed to tighten its belt a little bit. But because of that, it shouldn't be a ongoing funding model. It's just not the way to run a business. To the judge's point, you're either all in or you're all out. And if we're trying to make decisions on how to cover our budget based on investigations, as I mentioned earlier, if we're doing everything right and doing it fast, we bring in less money, which you would think in a business standpoint is a good thing. From a government standpoint, if we do things fast and they'll say to us, well, then you need less bodies next year, you need less money next year. And the problem with that is there's an ebb and flow. As you all know in the industry, sometimes applications are up and sometimes applications are down. You just can't run a funding model like that on a long-term basis. So look forward to discussing that with the governor's office and the legislature. Again, appreciate you all being here. We will continue this conversation. We will get to more of a to-do list. Mr. Reeser set the table very well with his 10 items. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Thank you all for being here. And with that, we'll conclude this meeting, but we will meet again shortly and continue the conversation with all of you. Thank you very much for being here.